For today's tutorial, we're going to learn how to create a 3D pop-up from a 2D image. So to begin, start up Photoshop and have a photo selected that you're going to work on. And the first thing you need to do is make 2 copies of this original image. You can use Command J on a Windows machine or Control J on a mouse. So I'll hit Control J 2 times here to get me additional copies. The bottom layer, which is our original layer, I'm going to name it Original. Middle layer, I'm going to name it Flat. And the top layer, I'm going to name it Pop-Up. Shut off the first 2 layers, the pop-up layer and the flat layer, and highlight the original layer. And then go to your layers panel and create a new fill or adjustment layer. You can click on the icon to bring up your options. And what we're going to do is create a gradient layer. And we're going to select the third option in, which is black white, and this is going to be our gradient layer. Once you've done that, turn on the flat layer and select the rectangular marquee tool. Once you select the rectangular marquee tool, you're going to draw a rectangle just below, in this case, the hands, basically across the waist. You're going to draw a rather large rectangle. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draw the rectangle across the waist, and then we're going to make a few adjustments. Okay, so we can move the rectangle, the selection around, and we could also make adjustments to it. Now what we want to do is we want to go up to the Select menu and select Transform Selection. Once we've hit Transform Selection, you can right mouse click inside the selection that you made and bring up some options. In this case, we're going to select Perspective. And we're going to go to the top of the rectangle and pull in the anchors from right to left and change the perspective of the selection. Now we can move, like I said, we can move it around. We can also right mouse click and change the scale. If you wanted to change the sizing, you can do that also. So I'm just going to show you how that's done. Once you're satisfied with your selection, we're going to hit the checkbox to select it. But here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep some of the image above the selection, and that will serve as the pop-up when we get to that step a little bit later. So I'm going to select this image or this selection, and I'm going to go to the flat layer, and I'm going to create a layer mask. Now you can come down in the layers panel. At the bottom there's an option that says Add Layer Mask. I'm going to hit that, and what it's going to do is going to mask out everything except the selection that we made previously. At this point, what we want to do is we want to bring up the layer style options for the flat layer, and we can do that by double clicking, and we can get our layer style options. And what we want to do here is we want to put a white border around this selection to give it the look of an old style photograph. So let's select the stroke option, and let's change some of the options within the stroke. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the size. Let's move the size slider up to let's say about 13. That's fine, but we want to change the position from the outside to inside. Okay, to give it a look of surrounding the photograph. We also want to make sure that the color is white, and that should give us the look that we need. So I'm just going to select OK, and we'll move on to the next step. So at this point, we have the part of the image that we want to have remain inside the photograph, but what we really want to do now is we want to show the pop-up that we're trying to create. So to do that, we're going to now turn on the pop-up layer, and now that layer is fully displayed. What we want to do is make a selection on the main subject of the image above the waist. Now, if you remember, let's go back to the flat layer. We selected the waist and below as what's going to remain on the photograph image, but the pop-up has to be the waist and above. So what we need to do is turn on the pop-up layer, make a selection all the way down to the waist. So I'll show you how to do that. In this case, I'm just going to use, you can use any of the selection tools. I prefer to use the quick selection tool. So I'm going to select the quick selection tool and start selecting from the top of the football helmet down through the uniform down to the waist. And I'm just going to click around and see if Photoshop will help me out and make a decent selection. Now you remember, you could always edit these selections, so don't be too hard on yourself if you don't make a proper selection initially. You can always hit the Q key to see what your selection is, and as you can see, it's a pretty good selection. But over here, I know it's a little tough to see, I should select a little more of the helmet and a little more of the emblem. So let's go with this for now, and we'll see how it is, and if we have to adjust it, we will. So to isolate this selection, it's as simple as going to the pop-up layer and again clicking on the layer mask, and that should mask out everything except our selection. So here we go. So I'm adding the layer mask. Here's the selection we made, and you can see we missed a few spots here. So why don't we go in and kind of clean that up? Now the way to clean that up is to select the layer mask on the pop-up, make sure you have your brush tool selected, and from previous tutorials of mine, you might remember that when you paint on a layer mask with white, you start to reveal the image. When you paint with black, you conceal the image. So right now I have the paintbrush selected. My foreground color is white, which means if I start painting, I should show more of the underlying layer. And that's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to just clean up a little bit here. I'm missing a little bit on the helmet, so I'm gonna bring that back from underneath. Looks like the football needs a little bit more, and the hand, and it looks like it went a little over here on the hand. So I could switch from my foreground color from white to black, and then when I paint, I will be hiding. So what we've done here is just revealed the top part of the image, and it just gives the perspective that it's popping up out of the image. So the basic pop-up, 3D pop-up is already done, but let's clean up the image a bit, make it look a little bit better. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to select the flat layer, and I'm going to control click on the layer mask, and that's just going to make a selection here. And the next step is we're going to move down to the gradient layer. I'm going to select the gradient layer, and the objective here is I want to put a shadow underneath this image of the picture that we've created. However, the way we have the gradient here, it's very dark on the bottom and very light on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do some quick editing on the gradient layer. I'm going to double click the gradient layer. I'm going to hit reverse. So now I'm going to put the dark on the top and the light on the bottom, but I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm going to select into the actual gradient and just change the color slightly. So I'm going to go to the right stop, double click on it and make it a little darker, hit OK. And I'm going to go to the left stop and make it a little lighter. Okay, so make it like that. All right, and that should set us up to create a nice shadow underneath this picture. Okay, so with the gradient layer selected, and we do have the selection already made, let's go create another layer. So go to the bottom of the layers panel, click the icon that says create new layer, and then go to edit, fill, and fill it with black. Now initially you're not going to see anything, and we'll change that in a second. So go back up to the flat layer and just click off on this link, because we're going to actually adjust the perspective of the image in a little bit. So let's keep the image and the actual mask separate. So I'm going to click off on this little link in between, and then we're going to select the layer mask. Okay, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to take the selection that has the white border, and we're actually going to change its perspective. We're going to actually warp it a little bit so that we can expose this black layer that we just created, and that'll create the shadow. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to the edit menu, select transform, and then select warp, and this grid will appear on your screen above the layer mask that we have selected for the flat image. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab each of the four corners, and we're going to move them around and expose this black layer that we created earlier for the shadow. So let's start on the bottom right, and I'm just going to take that handle and move it around so it looks like we can expose the shadow. In other words, we're looking to make it look like a picture sitting on a table, and it looks like it's curled up a little. So now you can see that there's a shadow associated. Okay, and we'll just change that over here too on the top. We'll change that, and we'll change this perspective. I'll hit OK. So at this point, what we can do is we can come back down to the shadow layer, and we can reduce the opacity a little because it's a little too dark. So we reduce the opacity a bit. You can see that. I'm going to deselect so we can see the whole image. So it's a little more gray than black, which is fine. Then we'll go into filter blur and select Gaussian blur, and then you can just blur that shadow a little bit just to give it a more natural, real world look. So I'll leave it like that for now. So right now we've done the pop-up, which looks fine. We've created the picture that it looks like it's popping out of. We gave it a shadow. We curled up that image, and we could leave the image as it is now, but there's one other change you might want to make. It's really to taste. I kind of like it. You go down to the gradient level, and remember, we still have the original sitting at the bottom, and it's totally blocked by the gradient level because we have 100% opacity. So if we went to that gradient level and just slightly lowered the opacity, what starts to happen is you start to see some of the original picture come back. So that gives it a little bit more of a 3D look, in my opinion. And again, it's to taste. If you want to do it, fine. If not, you can leave it like that, and or you can just bring it back and do that. So that's our finished project. Here's what the original looked like, our 2D image, and here's what it looks like when we made it into 3D. Okay, so I think we'll end the project here. Thanks for listening.